talk a little bit about energy today, including regulatory, shall we say, relief coming from the Trump administration for auto manufacturers with the new safer, affordable, fuel efficient, or safe vehicle rules coming out from the administration after a long joint process between the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Environmental Protection Agency in pursuit of what is already required by law, but doing it in, I think, a smarter way, a more free market way. It's one of the hallmarks of the Trump administration, for the most part, of cutting through the red tape. This replaces the previous CAFE fuel standards from the federal government. So what is this about, and why are we to be grateful for the Trump administration moving forward with these new safe vehicles rules as opposed to what we saw with the previous CAFE standards? Let's talk about it with Thomas Pyle, who is the president of the American Energy Alliance, and he joins us now here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Thomas, hello, sir. Welcome to the show.
How you doing?
No, I'm doing all right, Tom. It's good to have you here. How are you on this Tuesday? 31st?
Oh, staying sheltered in place with the kids, and we're doing our best to kind of keep a decent schedule going with everybody, and doing our part to stop the spread.
Yeah, no, it is so important, and I think everybody's doing everything that they can, and especially it's got to be challenging. And I have no children myself. It's got to be challenging to some extent having kids and keeping them occupied and having fun and enjoying life at the same time as everything's going on, and you're constrained in where you can even go with them.
Challenge, but we've had a schedule from last week when our school district issued an order that basically told us that they were going to be here through now the end of April, and slowly but surely the teachers are figuring it out too. So there'll be a little bit more hands-on learning for them.
Good.
And we're giving them walks and having little exercise sessions, and of course they're getting their share of screen time these days as well, just to keep everyone sane. So
yeah, oh, I bet, that's for sure. Okay, so before we get into the new safe vehicle rules coming out of the Trump administration, let's talk about these CAFE standards that Barack Obama had put into place and what was so bad or wrong about them and the approach that the previous administration was taking, Tom.
it's kind of a long story, but I'll try to get as succinct as I can. The administration, when the auto industry was bankrupt, and a lot of the bailouts that took place after the crash, the last crash, they basically were told by the administration that they would have to kind of put up with these unattainable mile per gallon mandates for their vehicles in exchange, in part, for the bankruptcy money. But they promised what they were called a mid-course review by the Obama administration. They said, look, these are pretty aggressive, unrealistic numbers, yeah, but in about, after a few years, you'll have a chance to reopen the process, and you'll be able to give us some feedback on whether it's attainable. Well, when they didn't like the outcome of the last election, they decided to skip that whole process, and they bottled up the mile per gallon mandates that they had put in place that they knew weren't attainable at all. 54.5 miles per gallon, completely impossible to attain, and is costing thousands of dollars per vehicle. And oh, by the way, it's not having a huge impact on carbon dioxide emission reductions either. So what the Trump administration did was, at the very beginning of his presidency, said, I'm going to reopen this rule as it was intended. And I'm going to do the spade work of right-sizing the mandate so that it meets its statutory obligation, which is a mile per gallon mandate per vehicle that, that is attainable, economically feasible, and also good for the environment. The previous administration ignored the
It looks like Tom Pyle's freezing up just a little bit on that signal there. You know, the wonders of Skype and everything when you've got different people streaming and so forth. So Tom Pyle, again, is our guest. He is with the American Energy Alliance. We're talking about the Trump administration moving forward with these new safe vehicles standards, or safe vehicles rule, compared to the CAFE standards that the Obama administration had previously put forward. And it was just, as Tom pointed out, completely unattainable. You couldn't actually accomplish the objective that the Obama administration was putting forward. And now, under the Trump administration, you have an EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, headed by Andrew Wheeler, who I've interviewed twice and is absolutely fantastic, who understands that you need to do things that are attainable and economical and feasible. We've got Tom Pyle back here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, again joining us, president of the American Energy Alliance. All right, Tom, so please pick up with your point. You were listing the three things that the safe standards will do.
So first of all, it's going to save us money. It's also going to be a safer, we're going to have less fatalities, highway fatalities as a result of this rule. And lastly, and most importantly, we're restoring this program to its intention. The CAFE mandate, personally, I would like to see it completely repealed. It was implemented at a time when we were concerned about our dependence on foreign oil. It was a way to reduce our dependence on using gasoline from imported sources. Well, now we're the #1 producer of oil in the world. We make more refined petroleum, in other words, gasoline, than we actually consume in this country, and we're starting to export more and more of it.
Yes.
So this rule really isn't necessary. What it has become is a holy grail green program for the environmentalists now, because they're trying to use this rule in order to jam CO2 reductions down our throats. And what the impact of that is bureaucrats in Sacramento, for example, and in Washington, D.C., are telling us what kind of cars we can drive and telling the automakers, forcing them to make cars that most Americans don't even have an interest in buying.
This goes to, we were having a previous discussion about the use and implementation of the Defense Production Act, forcing GM to make ventilators despite the fact that General Motors has already begun the process of making ventilators. What we're seeing in the private sector when it comes to vehicle standards is that these car manufacturers are not just meeting standards that are presented by government, but they also understand that consumers want fuel economy. They want safe vehicles. They want vehicles that will go forward well when they're on the road, drive well. They feel comfortable in those cars, but also they're getting the maximum amount of miles per gallon that's possible. And so what you're doing here with something like the CAFE standards, and although they're better, still the safe vehicles rule, is you are telling companies to do what they already have the incentive to do just to meet this government standard that may or may not be attainable for them in the first place, but they're already taking that initiative themselves. And I don't get why, except for the political reasons you're talking about, this green holy grail of sorts, why the government sees fit to mandate these types of things in a way that's at the minimum superfluous.
Yeah, look, the reason this rule is so important, and the reason that the environmental community and the New York Times and others who don't view anything that President Trump does as a positive, is because the way that the Greens have changed the program under President Obama, the state of California literally has the steering wheel when it comes to setting these mile per gallon mandates. And so what's happening is California is dictating environmental policy, dictating what kind of cars we can drive, what types of vehicles are allowed in order to meet the mandate in states like Pennsylvania and Ohio and Florida and other places. And so the Trump administration recognizes that the huge cost savings of right-sizing this rule and making it a tough but fair rule, it's expected to save the economy billions and billions of dollars because, as you know, regulations are always also hidden taxes. So consumers are going to pay less for vehicles. And that's important because the average cost of a car these days is $38,000. And right now, people are taking out loans for 6, 7, now 8 years as a payback schedule for some of these loans. And these cars may not last that long for them, and then it might make them upside down on their loans. So, the days of the government telling us what cars we can drive are coming to an end under this rule.
Again, we're talking with Tom Pyle, president of the American Energy Alliance. What this also made me think of, which, as you were speaking, Tom, is the Trump administration's replacement of the Clean Power Plan with the Affordable Clean Energy Rule. Same kind of situation where you have at least an improved way of going about it, something more economical, more sensible, but the folks in the media bash on it and say, no, this isn't right, this isn't appropriate, you shouldn't go about it in this sort of way. And I think one of the important conversations that we need to have is about the facts of the matter. I believe that climate change is something that's happening and that human beings are a contributing force to it. But the private sector is what is driving forward with the innovations needed in order to address this, to bring down carbon emissions, to provide an opportunity, as we have seen, for the United States to lead the world in a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, particularly because of the private sector, Tom.
That's exactly right. While the folks who want the government to manage and micromanage our lives and tell us what kind of energy that we can use, what kind of cars we can drive, all these years with the Paris Agreement, with the, as you mentioned, the Clean Power Plan, which I actually call the Creating Poverty Plan, and with this rule and the Mercury Rule and all the other rules that they put forward, there is an element of environmental protection. But at the end of the day, CO2 reduction is occurring at a much greater pace in all of the time that these rules have been envisioned. And fortunately, President Trump has undone and right-sized in terms of what their intended effects are. With the fracking revolution in this country, the United States' emissions have gone down beyond the Paris Agreement targets that the environmental community beats on the president all the time for having pulled out of that bad deal. The market is doing what the interventionists and the globalists and the Greens want, quote unquote, to be done, but that's really not what they're after. They're after control and power, because if you control the economy, if you control energy in this country, you control the economy. It's as simple as that.
One thing that's so striking to me, too, is when the Trump administration said, we're not going to move forward with the Clean Power Plan. We're not going to continue to pursue it in court to defend it, but we're going to do this new ACE rule. The media was apoplectic. They were saying, oh, my gosh, he's ending the Clean Power Plan. But let's just be clear about one important thing, Tom. The Clean Power Plan never actually went into effect. I remember just after the ACE rule was announced by the Trump administration, that Andrew Wheeler came on an old radio show that I had hosted at the time, and he said, look, the reality is this hasn't gone into effect. The Supreme Court issued a stay on it, and now we're moving forward with something that fits in with Supreme Court requirements that we actually, at the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, address climate change, address the issue of carbon dioxide emissions, but we're doing so in a much more economical way. And one of the things that I love about this administration in terms of policy has been the emphasis on deregulation, on cutting the red tape as much as they can and trying to unleash the unlimited potential of the private sector. And that's critical when we're talking about auto manufacturers, we're talking about oil and gas production, we're talking about coal or what have you. All of these different things, if you unleash the private sector, that's where we're seeing the greatest success.
Yeah, you hit on some really important points. The media is calling all of these efforts by the Trump administration rollbacks, and he doesn't care about the environment, and weakening this and weakening that. No, the previous administration and the Supreme Court ruled that they overstepped. They went beyond what they were allowed to do in the law, and you cannot just flagrantly disregard the laws in this country. If the Greens don't like it, they should urge Congress to change those laws. This administration is right-sizing regulations, reforming the regulatory agenda. He's not undoing anything. He's resizing and right-sizing the stuff that was put in place in the previous administration that went way beyond the scope of what they were even allowed to do. And that's a really important point, and is what the administration prior to Trump wanted exactly to do and set it up that way by ramming through what we call these midnight regulations, where they pushed a bunch of rules through on their way out the door, knowing full well that the Greens and the media and their allies would be able to say, oh, look, he's rolling back all this stuff. And it's just not true. He's increasing the cafe mandate. We don't even support that part of it. But he's doing it in a way that is applicable to the law, that it takes into consideration consumers and not just bureaucrats in Sacramento.
A few minutes left with our guest, Tom Pyle, president of the American Energy Alliance. Right now, we have seen oil go down to its lowest price per barrel since 2002, February. That's where it closed at yesterday. I haven't seen the fluctuations today so far. But, Tom, what are you noticing is going on in the oil market right now? And is there any way that this deregulatory effort of the Trump administration, maybe states around the country, might be able to help support oil prices for American oil and gas producers during this tough time?
Yeah, this is one of, they call it a double black swan. You know, you had the combination of this coronavirus on top of the fact that Saudi Arabia and Russia decided to turn up the spigot, so to speak, and try to put pressure on our producers and put some of them out of business, quite frankly. The industry is going to get through this. It's going to be a tremendous challenge, and it is going to be painful. And normally, when oil prices, as you know, as a global commodity are low, we get a stimulus, right? Because gas prices are lower and we get to drive more, we get to buy bigger cars or things of that nature. But we're not able to do that under this situation, under this lockdown. And that has really been the really hard part of all of this, is we're not even getting the benefits of a boom cycle of a lower oil price. My heart is out for the oil patch, because they are going to be going through some rough times. But just like we will get through this coronavirus, they will come back. We are now moving quickly towards OPEC being an irrelevant organization. We're now the #1 producer of oil. Those OPEC nations are starting to break. They're starting to go their own way. So I envision a future where, while if we can get out of this short term with minimal harm and minimal interventions, i.e. quotas and things like that, then the industry is going to come out again even stronger, and the United States is going to be that much more dominant. But in the short time, it's real pain. I know the president wanted to fill that strategic petroleum reserve, which is the reserve we have. There's plenty of room in it. Unfortunately, Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi forced that out of the last package. So as a short-term measure, that might work to buy some of that oil and get it, out of the market. And let's hope that they're able to get that through the Democratic opposition.
What I would also like to see is, around the country, I'm here in Colorado, and we had Senate Bill 181 passed last year, which was, I called it Colorado's green little deal on the Platte, giving an example for the rest of the country of what not to do in their states and what also could come at the national level if we implemented some kind of a Green New Deal. I think Colorado is one of many different examples, growing number of examples of regulatory restrictions that are constricting oil and gas production in a way that can be very harmful economically for a country that finally, it's remarkable, and you alluded to this before, Tom, we are a net exporter of oil and gas now. And by the way, for the green energy folks, you should keep in mind that around the globe, coal production has increased dramatically the past 3 decades. I mean, that's a good thing because it's a sign of economic growth and prosperity. They're finally getting electric grids created in other parts of the globe. But at the same time, the downside is the significant carbon emissions that are being put out there. What's the solution to that? More natural gas exports from the United States to other parts of the globe that can put it to use in their electrical grid, because it is affordable, cleaner energy, certainly cleaner than the way in which they've been producing coal in many of these countries. And so producing more oil and gas in the United States is a boon economically, but also better for the environment. And yet these regulatory restrictions are not only harmful right now during a crisis, Tom Pyle, but also in the long run when we're trying to address situations like climate change and other issues, but they have a very narrow view of how to achieve it, and that's the core of the problem, I think.
Yeah, and this administration has done a great deal to lift the shackles, if you will, on the regulatory side. Fortunately for us in this country, we are blessed with the most resources than any other country: oil, coal, natural gas, methane hydrates in the future. We are also blessed with a couple of things that sort of don't get really focused on in the shale, in the talk about the shale revolution. You hear a lot about the technology, but we have these resources located on private and state lands for the most part. And we have tremendous federal resources, by the way, but for the longest time that was the only game in town. But now that we have these resources and we're accessing them on private and state lands, the federal government can't get their mitts on it. That's why they've tried with these methane rules and some other things, Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act, to go after the oil production on private and state lands. And we fortunately have been able to push, hold them at bay. But the third component is we have a system of property rights in this country that allow homeowners, landowners, to have a piece of this pie. They own the subsurface rights, and so they're able to lease the subsurface to these oil companies, and they get royalty checks year after year after year. And so everybody is winning with this production. As you mentioned, if we're producing more natural gas, it's displacing other types of energy that may increase CO2. And by the way, we can still burn that coal in other places because we have, in the last 8 to 10 years, we have reduced by half the number of people in the world that suffer from energy poverty or have no access to affordable energy. And we shouldn't deny other nations, other countries, developing countries, the ability to be able to enjoy the electricity running all day long.
That we take for granted, exactly. I think that's a very good point. Tom Pyle, president of the American Energy Alliance, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. We're out of time, sir, but I really appreciate it. Great conversation. I'm sure we will have you back somewhere down the line.
Thanks very much, and I'll get the Skype stuff fixed up for the next round.
Oh, I think it worked pretty well. It's just fine. Hey,
All right.
there's some streaming issues. There are different things in the era of COVID-19 where you've got kids at home doing things on the computers and your neighbors and everything. So it's just, I think, how the way things are today. But Tom Pyle, we appreciate
I'm
it.
supporting my friends in Texas in the patch with my In and Out t-shirts. So.
Excellent. Good for you. Well, I'm sure they appreciate it. All right, once again, Tom Pyle joining us from the American Energy Alliance here on Jimmy at the Crossroads.